Hello and welcome to Storehouse 7 Ministries with me, your host Chris Wickland, and today we start on Revelation chapter 6. We now finally come to the chapter of Revelation where we are invited to see into the 7 seals of the scroll, which only Jesus is worthy to open. From here on in, we are invited to see future apocalyptic history. Now, this is very important to be aware of. We cannot state with any certainty at all that Revelation chapters 4 to 5 are set in the future, as many suppose. They may have been a real-time experience for the Apostle John. And I say this because it is only now, and from this point on, that we're going to truly start to see future history revealed. Now, the reason for this is because of what the scroll with the 7 seals reveals. It is quite clear that many classical assumptions on Revelation chapter 4, for example, are completely unfounded, and this is already being covered on this commentary. We must now come to the text with as little assumptions as possible, and thus stop making the text say or mean something it clearly isn't meant to say. Only now and from this point on are we invited to look into the future. So we now come to the 7 seals. Each seal represents a judgment upon sinful mankind. We have 6 seals broken and opened in Revelation chapter 6, and the 7th seal is not opened until chapter 8. The first of the 7 seals is about the rider on the white horse. Revelation chapter 6 verses 1 to 2. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, "Come!" I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering, and to conquer. Verses 1 to 8, comprising seals 1 to 3, is about the unleashing of what we call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Again, it is assumed that they all go out together, but the text doesn't say this. Each horseman is released, i.e., each separate seal being broken, and as a seal is broken, then we see a part of the history where one of these horses are released. In verses 1 to 2, some believe that the white rider on the white horse is depicted as the Messiah because of a similar description in Revelation chapter 19. However, in this first seal, it makes out clearly that this rider is really one of 4 others. Jesus returns to destroy Satan and evil and bring peace. This horseman does nothing of the sort. He brings pain and suffering to the world, and thus many commentators state that this white horseman is clearly not Jesus. Now, the first horseman represents the conqueror, which naturally leads to the second horseman, which is war. To help us understand this, it would best serve us to look back in our own modern history. Prior to the Second World War, we saw the rise of Adolf Hitler. He was very aggressive with his plans of conquering other lands outside of Germany. It was his invasion of Poland which forced the nations of the earth to declare war against him. For there to be war on a global scale, one must have to first of all be a conqueror who will go out to conquer nations. This will then force other nations to go to war against this aggressor. No one is really sure if this refers to the Antichrist rising and conquering, which comes to the world to go to war, or whether this links to Matthew 24 verses 6 to 7, which says, "You'll be hearing of wars and rumours of wars. See that you are not frightened, for these things must take place, but this is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquake." It needs to be noted that the verses of Matthew 24, 6 to 7 are very likely both an overview of generic future history as well as the outplaying of the end of days in prophecy. Note that the beginning of the end of days, according to Matthew 24 and Revelation 6, begins with those 4 key components. Firstly, one rises up to conquer. Secondly, earthly conflict will then be caused, i.e. world war. Thirdly, there will be famine and thus scarcity of food. Fourthly, there will be widespread death through war, famine, disease, and animals attacking humans. Now, all this is the beginning of birth pangs. Now, traditionally, we have seen all living history as birth pangs, and this is a fair interpretation. But maybe the birth pangs only truly take place and start at the end of the age when the Antichrist appears by conquering. This powerful leader is traditionally seen as the little horn who arises to conquer in Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 to 8, verses 24 and 25. Now remember, horns signify political strength, kings, leaders, power, and authority. Let's look at those verses now. After this I looked, and behold, a fourth beast, fearful, terrifying, and exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth, and it was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling underfoot whatever was left. It was exceedingly different from all the beasts before it, and it had 10 horns. I was especially noticing its horns, and behold, there was another horn, a little one. It came up out among them, and the 3 horns of those before it were uprooted because of its presence. And behold, there were eyes like the eyes of a man in this horn, and it had a mouth speaking arrogant things. Its 10 horns are 10 kings. They shall arise, and after them another shall arise. He shall surpass all those before him in evils, and he shall humble 3 kings. He will speak extremely arrogant words and wear down the saints of the Most High. He will devise a way to change times and law, and he shall be given authority for a time, times, and half a time. The early church fathers had made important commentaries on this and other passages in Daniel, which are worth taking a quick look at. The first statement comes from Hippolytus of Rome. He was around in AD 170 to 235, and he wrote about the 10 horns and linked it to Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue with the 10 toes in Daniel chapter 2. And after this, what remains, beloved, but the toes of the feet of the image, in which part is iron and part clay mixed together? And mystically, by the toes of the feet, he meant the kings who are to arise from among them. As Daniel also says in these words, I considered the beast, and lo, there were 10 horns behind it, among which shall rise another horn, an offshoot, and shall pluck up by the roots the 3 that were before it. And under this was signified none other than the Antichrist, who is also himself to raise the kingdom of the Jews. Hippolytus goes on to say that the 3 horns are plucked up by the root by him, the 3 kings of Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia, whom he cuts off in the array of battle. And he, after gaining terrible power over all, being nevertheless a tyrant, shall stir up tribulation and persecution against men, exalting himself against them. For Daniel says, I considered the horn, and behold, that horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, till the beast was slain and perished, and its body was given to the burning of fire. That's from Daniel 7:21 and verse 11. All those quotes were taken from the End Times by the Ancient Church Fathers, written by Ken Johnson. Also, the church father Irenaeus, who lived in AD 130 to 202, also commented on these 10 horns in the book of Daniel. 10 kings will arise from what used to be the Roman Empire. The Antichrist slays 3 of the kings, and he is the 8th king among them. The kings will destroy Babylon, then give the Babylonian kingdom to the beast, and put believers to flight. After that, they will be destroyed by the coming of the Lord. Daniel's horns are the same as the 10 toes, the toes being part iron and part clay, which means some kings will be active and strong while others weak and inactive, and the kings will not agree with each other. And that's taken from Against Heresies, chapter 5, verse 26. One thing we need to be aware of is that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are sent by God as a judgment upon the world for its many sins in the last days. Matthew 24 verse 37 warns us that prior to Jesus' return, it will be as in the days of Noah. It is written in the Midrash Rabbah Genesis and in the Jewish Talmud that in the days of Noah there were wedding contracts issued where men could marry women, and men could marry men, and men could marry beasts. The rainbow became a covenantal sign and warning from God to remind mankind of what happened before the great flood and to not repeat it. And this judgment is also spoken of in 1st and 2nd Enoch and backs up other ancient Jewish literature texts which state this fact. God in his providence has placed rainbows everywhere in the Western world today. We have seen it in various political groups, over the NHS, or you see it even in England in the police service. And these are to remind us and warn us that we have now revived the sins of the ancient world. This is all important to understand because we need to know why God would send out the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It is the beginning of his judgments upon the earth for allowing the resurrection of the sins of the pre-flood ancient world to be revived. And one needs to understand that as much as the Antichrist is the enemy of God, God allows him to come to power to begin the judgments of God upon the earth. Now, I know this will raise many questions, but plague, war, famine, and poverty have always been tools God has used and warned that he will use if nations reject him. We see this in Ezekiel chapter 14, verses 12 to 20. Leviticus 26, verses 14 to 26. Also Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 3, 24, verse 10, 29, verse 17, Ezekiel 5:17, and Ezekiel 14:21. The 4 horsemen are also the 4 likely candidates who appear in Zechariah's vision in Zechariah chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. The notion of God pouring out judgments upon the earth is sadly not considered a possibility in today's mainstream amillennial Christianity. And this will explain why liberalism and syncretism, that is, syncretizing the church to the ways of the world, and why that's rife in the church today. God judging people and nations is an entirely biblical, consistent theme of Scripture both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. The concept of God sending plagues, pestilence, war and famine is often sadly poo-pooed in today's Christianity. However, the Catholic, Orthodox and some Protestant denominations still teach and believe that God judges sin and punishes it through war, plague, famine and pestilence. However, I need to stress that yes, God is merciful and loving, but when our nations embrace the sins of the pre-flood world, and the sign of the rainbow is now branded everywhere, we need to understand we are now living in the days of Noah, and the end of days is now sadly upon us. When the Third World War erupts, and I believe it to be soon now, and the current year of this commentary is 2021, I personally believe the rise of the Antichrist and the 4 horsemen is now only years away, not decades or lifetimes away. Anyway, that will do you for today, and I'll be back soon. God bless you. See you again soon. Bye-bye.